Good morning, everyone. This is Rachna, the CEO of Graduate Student Association with you this morning to facilitate the effective communication training. And along with me, I have Tevita Lesuma, the General Manager of Student Engagement and Strategic Partnership. Good morning, Tevita.
Morning, Rachna.
So it's fantastic to have you join us in the second session of effective communication training this morning. And I think the last session, we are very grateful to the students who've attended the session and provided us some feedback. So we hope that this session will also be very helpful to you, and very happy to receive your feedback. So before I commence, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are virtually meeting, the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, from where I'm broadcasting. And I'd like to pay my respect to the past, present, and emerging leaders, and also to the Aboriginal people and the Torres Strait Islanders. So Tevita, before we start today, I'd actually like to talk about a very significant day today, the National Sorry Day on 2020. And this day is observed the 26th of May as a National Sorry Day. And it remembers and acknowledges the mistreatment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who were forcefully removed from their families and communities, which we now know as a stolen generation. So the National Story Day is a day to acknowledge the strength of the stolen generation survivors and reflect on how we can all play a part in the healing process for our people and nation, for the people. So while this day carries great significance for the stolen generation and the Aboriginal people, it's important that we as Australians also have a role to play to acknowledge the pain and suffering that has been, that they've been subjected to. And I think that tomorrow, as we start the National Reconciliation Week, each one of us have to take responsibility of making our country a country where we pledge to respect, where we pledge to acknowledge the history of this country. And at GSA, we will be joining the University of Melbourne and participating on the different activities that have been promoted through the National Reconciliation Week from the 27th of May onwards. So I thought it is very important that we address this issue. Each one of us play a role in this process of healing, and that it is a day that acknowledges the stolen generation's journey, their pain and their suffering, the historical injustice that has happened in our country, and also to acknowledge the intergenerational trauma for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait families, their communities, and their people. So in my humble way, I would like to be a part of that process and acknowledge the gross mistreatment that has happened, and extend my apology and be sorry for what has happened in the past. So taking that on note, thank you, Tevita, for joining us. How has your week been this week?
So far, so good. And happy to be part of this session again with you, Rachna, and to have our students on the call. Welcome. We spend a lot of time at GSA pooling together resources to be able to provide extra support to the grad students. So I appreciate that. And also, today is a very special day, being our National Sorry Day here in Australia. And thank you for the kind words that have you put forward. And I think, just to reflect is a big part of today.
Fantastic. So talking about reflection, last week we spent a bit of time talking about words, just how a conversation or when we communicate, We talk about words, we talk about body tone, the body language, and our tone. And we had an interesting conversation about the I and we statement. We talked about the importance of the tone. And today we'll talk a little more about continuing that session, but actually understanding what we mean by conflict, and the different methods, conversations can lead to resolving conflicts. How to maintain your conversation and your communication style when you're resolving conflict. We'll be also talking about understanding that it is really very important to understand that the conversation that we have actually supports and actually addresses the way we resolve conflict. So understanding conflict is generally defined as relationship disputes between two or more parties. That means when people disagree on certain thing, or they don't agree to on certain matter, we call that as a conflict. It's basically, as the Oxford Dictionary would say, it's actually the clashing of opposed principles. So the most important thing, it's really important to understand that there is a capacity for us to actually be able to recognize that there is a need to have conflict, because we're all different, and there is an ability to use different conflict resolution strategies. Now, many people choose to just avoid conflict. Like, I'm just going to agree to everything what people say so that I want to avoid conflict. In my view, that is not realistic, actually, even at a workplace or with your colleagues or in a family. And, avoiding, somewhere the bubble is going to burst. The other aspect of it is of resolving conflict is to sometimes accommodate different views, in the sense, yes, I have certain disagreement on that, but I'm going to accommodate this difference, and I'm going to be accommodating in a process of resolving the differences that we have. In some cases, people may just compromise and say, you know what, I'm happy to disagree on this, but like we say, agree to disagree, and then I'm going to actually adapt into it, into this new situation, and understand that I have made a compromise, but it's a conscious compromise that I have made. And sometimes the conflict is escalated to such an extent that you start competing. You just want to get your way through. You just want to ensure that this is what you're saying, and you're not going to stick by what you're saying. And that is what we talk about competing. Collaborating is a bit different, where we actually work through the differences and actually come to a new position, which is a bit different from compromising, but where you actually can accommodate each, it's a combination of accommodating and compromising, but you may come upon a completely new agreement where actually there's some level of agreeing to disagree, and in some level being able to accommodate and compromise each other's views. I thought it's important to talk about this avoiding and accommodating and other things that's there, because it is important to think about the type of resolutions that we would have. So Tevita, I may quickly go through the types of resolutions in this slide, but then we'll give some examples of where you've kind of used, the communicate and negotiate strategy, or I may give you some examples of mediation or arbitration, and where litigation and legislation kind of comes into place. So when we're talking about communication is integral in kind of the way we deal with the types of resolution. It could be a process where we can communicate, talk things through with people, explain each other's view, be able to develop an appreciation for each other's thoughts, and come upon, look at each of those ideas tactfully, be able to listen carefully, active listening, being able to be empathetic to the situation, appreciate where people are coming from, and being able to communicate, also helps in conflict resolution. The other one is where you may be the person dealing with two people who have conflict, and you support them to negotiate how to deal with the conflict step by step. And many courses are there, great programs are there that help you become a good negotiator. That is where you are facilitating people to talk through their conflict and being able to follow a step-by-step process so that they can actually agree to resolve their conflict. The other way of dealing with it is actually being able to look at how to mediate. Let us look at, there are two parties who have opposing views, and you act as a mediator to get each of them to understand the situation of disagreement and actually let them come to a collaborated approach of agreeing to come to a new position to resolve the conflict. Okay? Arbitrating is where people present both sides of the story, and the arbitrator is basically a judge who will hear both sides and say, okay, this is what I'm going to think. This is the way we can resolve this issue. In case of litigation and legislation is when people can't work out, there's so much of conflict, they decide to go to the courts. And in the court, you may have, it may be at different levels. It may be a magistrate's court or a family court or a county court, or it could be, different areas of the legislation where courts have the responsibility, where people can use their lawyers and they go before a judge or a jury and you are able to litigate. And the other one is once you have a precedent, sometimes the government decides to make that a law, and that's when you legislate. Say, this is what we have found. So you find a lot of that during COVID-19 in relation to credits and debts and or residential tenancy, where you may say currently this is the process where people have decided to be treated in this way if they have debt, and they may get 90 days interest-free, or different legislations are brought in credit laws or family court in relation to children's access and other issues. So I think, Tevita, what would really help, I think the people who are listening to it is, let's talk about some examples that you have used in your journey of either in a family situation or with your colleagues at work or as a manager, where you've used the strategy of to communicate or negotiate, where let's say two staff members are having some differences in their thoughts, and what kind of communication style you've used to communicate to resolve conflict.
Sure. So look, in most organizations, not everyone always gets on, and that's just the nature of people with different views. And I guess for me, a situation occurred not in GSA, in a previous workplace, where I had two staff members who, whatever happened, they would always argue their own points with each other, and they would also, what I understood, misinterpret what the other person was saying. So it was up to me to facilitate a resolution for the conflict because it was apparent. And so what it was, I would have a staff member come to me, so-and-so said this, and I said, okay, that doesn't sound correct. And I would, and then I would say, what did they actually say? And then have you got an email? And I said, okay, so what that actual email means is this. And so the person would actually take the email the wrong way. And so I would sit down and say, no, what Joe Smith is trying to tell you is that he would like this done because of these situations. He's not telling you what to do. He's asking you what to do. And I think there was that tone and communication is that the person receiving the information took it the wrong way and would be very defensive against it. And vice versa. The other person would say, I've asked such and such to do this and they haven't done it. And I don't know why. And I think the part of the first part of the type of resolution, communicating, was just getting common ground, just breaking down what the conversation was actually trying to achieve. And so it actually ended up being quite cordial after that, because it said that they understood that they were both taking the information the wrong way. They lived on different sites, so they hardly even interact with each other face to face. And so for them to see everything through email was really hard to really get that tone. We talked about that last week. So yeah, that was one of the communications. But there's always an opportunity to have an informal chat instead of writing emails. You know, this is what is happening. Just pick up a telephone or go and see the person. Is everything all right? Can we talk about, you know, what's happening in the background? Another part is to negotiate. This actually happens a lot with our suppliers. So we have different partners that we work with at GSA and different organizations I've worked with in the past. And they want to have the best opportunity to give it to them. So for example, let's just say they want to have a space on orientation. And, you know, we have supplier A that wants to engage into the students, and you've got supplier B who wants to engage. And for them, they're like, well, why does supplier B get a better area than we do? We've known you for longer. We are a better known brand. We have nicer things to give to the students. I mean, you can get that petty. And so the conversation I have is that, okay, let's put you guys together, and work out what each party would like as an outcome for that day. Say orientation. Okay, you want to talk to 300 students. You want to be handing out 300 goodie bags. So is there a way we can accommodate both of your outcomes in a way that no one is no one is missing out? I think that particular situation, actually, we found that a certain place in orientation facilitated their outcome better than it would for the other partner. So if we were able to find and give like stats and some information about the cohort, that both parties were happy where they were sitting in the end, because they understood it more and they knew that they weren't being undermined or they weren't being put in a worse off position than the other supplier. And I think that was about negotiating the conversation about, actually, you are better off here, and actually you are better off here because of these situations. So that was part of our conversations. And it happens all the time. It happens all the time.
Very good examples, I think. And in both of these, communicate and negotiate, what I understood from your example is it's the way you communicate with both the parties, you know, being very mindful about the words that you're using, the tone of that language that you are trying to communicate, not favoring one over the other, and actually being very selective of the words, you know, ensuring that the words are really chosen so that you're not giving each of them a feeling like, I prefer what you're saying to the other, but you're supporting them to communicate. I think I want to give a similar example to graduates at the moment during COVID-19. You know, you have found yourself in a situation where things are very difficult for you with your faculty, and, you know, you've got to make negotiations with your supervisor in relation to extending some time in the way the thesis can be submitted, or to talk about their barriers. Just being mindful about how you speak to them, what kind of body language, the tone, and, you know, as Tevita said, where preferable, try to seek an appointment and have that communication rather than sending a very rude, I guess, an email, which will again aggravate the situation. So I just want to briefly talk a little bit about mediation. And I've noticed that in many of the roles that I've had, is, as Tevita said, is, you know, you try to communicate, you negotiate with people, but sometimes you reach a point where sometimes as an employer or employee, there may be some differences, or sometimes between two staff where there is a bit of a conflict on a disagreed situation. It's always good to bring in a trained mediator who can unravel the situation for each other and say, So this is how you felt upset when she spoke to you or he spoke to you, and be able to get, get you to listen to the other, support you in good listening, because often conflicts arise because you're not listening to the other person. As Tevita said, you're not understanding their point of view, and mediation allows to do that. And I have found mediation, usually people consider mediation as very threatening and say, oh, I'm not going to mediation. It's a way that I have to say sorry. No, mediation is actually allowing, as the word says, to mediate, is to actually to liaise, to facilitate the conversation. And I recommend people who are at workplaces, or you find yourself with being, a supplier or a person, if you go into a job where you are having difficulty with your manager, that if after having that proper informal communication or trying to get somebody to negotiate a point, it's okay to talk to HR and seek for mediation. That doesn't mean that you're a troublemaker. I think people think that if you go for mediation, oh, I'm not going to go for mediation because people think I'm a troublemaker, and so I'm just going to agree to what the other party said. I think in some cases, it's important that we may need to go to arbitration, because in arbitrations can happen at Fair Work Commission or at a tribunal, and that's actually, though there is a framework for them to be given the authority to make a decision, it's still the arbitrator is just acting like a judge to hear both sides of the both sides of the issue, and then be able to take a decision based on guided policies or principles. The common example would be when you have issues with your tenancy, when you've had issue with your employment, that you do seek support from a tribunal. Or I think the most common one that we are very familiar in Australia is the AFL and the NRL games, where you hear that every news once the footy season starts. In relation to litigation and legislation, I'll briefly just kind of touch that litigation, sometimes some conflict, which are related to severe violence, or in relation to theft, fraud, where there's family disputes, it reaches a question of being able to get, using the existing laws to seek a resolution. And that's when you use a litigation process. And litigation process is often managed by legal representation and before a judge that is there. They're stressful situations, and that's why you nominate a lawyer to talk on your behalf, because people can become too. That's why whenever you go to court, the magistrates or people who are in judge's position will often ask you, have you sought legal help, and have you got a lawyer? Because you are able to seek that support to communicate better. And of course, I've briefly touched about laws, that some laws, there are sometimes in relation to conflict comes the necessity to create a law, and that's when we legislate. That is there. So I may briefly stop at this moment and ask Tevita, do any of the participants have any questions of us, or do you have any questions?
I think, to be honest, I think, okay, one general question I have is, with the types of resolution, are we thinking that it's, if you can get through the resolution, the conflict, or resolve the conflict through the top level versus the bottom level, is it preferable, or is it a chain where you have to just keep going through it? I guess that would be my general question: is this a process, or is it basically informal versus formal?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good question, Tevita, because I think it goes back to the previous slide, where you are with the conflict. Are you in the stage of collaborating? Are you deciding to compromise? And I think when it comes to a competing kind of level, it's very hard to go through communication, negotiation, and mediation. It's almost where you have to get somebody to be your arbitrator or litigate to kind of see who is winning over the other. That's when you kind of use that. It also depends on the nature of the situation and what is to lose, when it's a custody of your child, when it is your tenancy that you're losing or employment, and the cause of the pain and the suffering that it has caused to you. People may think, I don't think feel like, particularly in situations where you've been bullied or harassed, or where there's sexual harassment or other things, it's very hard to have a communication or a negotiation or a mediation process, because the pain and suffering is just not reconcilable at all. And therefore, in my experience is that as a trained mediator, I've always feel that I also make a judgment to say, I'm not able to mediate this because I believe that, these are not situations that can be reconciled through a mediation. And I think that's what a good mediator should be able to do. But I think in workplaces, when there are low conflicts, which is more differences of opinion, I would recommend the strategy used for communication and negotiating and trying to get some independent mediation happening.
Brilliant. Thanks.
So I may then start, which is very important if we don't have any questions from our attendees about conversations. So when people say, I'm going to have I think I may try and look at having an informal conversation. It's just a private talk. It's just when two people are talking, they're exchanging their thoughts and feelings or ideas, or, in what's the new information that we've got or what you've discussed. That's it. I like talking about conversation because your style of conversation is very important in the way you communicate your message. And Tevita, I don't know whether you've sometimes had a conversation about an idea, and if somebody is a good listener, even if that idea doesn't go through, if the person has been thoughtful in giving you the space to exchange your thoughts or feelings or ideas, you feel validated, you feel as if you're being respected, and it's a healthy conversation. But before the first sentence finishes, if somebody jumps in or makes these kind of facial expressions to kind of say, I don't really know what you're talking about, it creates a lot of animosity and disrespect. I've seen that in people who participate in board positions and council positions or in management roles. Sometimes your facial expression of when you are having a conversation with your colleagues or friends, and the way you have that kind of informal talk, like, let's catch up with coffee and have an informal chat. It's so beautiful. But then if you're not mindful about your body language and your tone and the way you are listening or respecting, I don't think it's a respectful, formal conversation. I don't know what your thoughts are about it, Tevita.
Yeah, absolutely. This has actually happened to me at a senior level. I had a manager who was very much would cut me off when I was bringing my ideas to the table. And it was frustrating because you would want to have that opportunity to be able to voice your opinions and your thoughts at a senior level. And I actually ended up having an informal conversation with that person later on, just to understand if everything was okay, because in those situations where we're all sharing ideas, I felt like my ideas weren't being listened to. And I'm not saying that my ideas were great, although I thought some of them were fantastic. But I thought that, I wanted to understand what was going on. Yeah. And actually, it was that dialogue with that person that actually broke down our communication. And they basically said, I had no idea I was doing that. I guess for me, I'm just always going to voice my opinion. I don't even know when the right cue is to wait till someone's finished talking. Or I said, actually, yeah, you've been doing it a while and I just want to see if everything's all right. And actually it set the scene for our relationship later on. And I think those types of informal private chats really go a long way in setting the scene for future engagement.
And I have found this, that as an employer, I love these group discussion sessions where you are getting a group of people to come together and talk and have a group discussion, because you actually can observe their conversation style. So when graduates are going for group discussion, remember that apart from understanding how well you can communicate your ideas, what they're looking at is your style of conversation. Do you talk over people? Do you respect? Do you connect through your eye, through eye contact, whether you value and exchange their thoughts and ideas? And also being very clear about, the situation that you're dealing with. Communication is only good when a person has the emotional intelligence to understand the surroundings, the status of the circumstance, and the combinations of the circumstances at a specific period of time. I think we spoke about it last time. And when we're talking about situation is that often, I remember you giving examples about staff when they're very distressed, that at that period of time they've come back after a serious illness or a family situation, to give them a sit down and talk about their work performance may not be a great idea, because even if their intentions are good to kind of get them back focused at work, it's just a wrong situation. And being aware of your surroundings and managing your conversation in such a way so that if there is any existing conflict or any differences, you have to be aware of those situations before you jump into a conflict resolution or a disciplinary process and things like that. So very related to the question that you asked me, Tevita, about what do you use, whether do you communicate, do you negotiate, do you mediate, do you arbitrate, or do you litigate, is sometimes based on the situation. And I think as you learn to listen and to be aware of your surroundings, and I felt, I think, they do say imitation is the best form of flattery. I've noticed that as a staff member, as I've worked in every position, being able to observe others, being able to validate their skills and be prepared to learn from other people is such a beautiful way to grow in yourself personally. I don't believe, in any job that I'm the CEO and so I have nothing to learn. I always feel the maximum that I have learned more than a professional development is being able to look at other people and develop a sense of admiration for their strength. And when you look at their strength and you're able to learn from it, that is the best way you can learn from your surroundings and then be able to grow into having proper communications. Any comments on that, Tevita?
Yeah, I think it's spot on. I think, being able to understand or have some sort of empathy around the situation definitely puts you in a greater stead for getting through a conflict.
And I think the journey of leadership is also about that leadership is not about all power and talk and being able to make a decision maker.
No.
It is about actually accommodating a space where you decide to compromise and let other people actually have their views and respect their views. And I have to say my journey has been very changed as I've grown into these positions, because I think style of leadership also changes as you start becoming much more conscious about your own behavior and how people receive your messages.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is an interesting slide that I felt that I'd like to share. Sometimes I hear, people will say, I've said it myself, that, oh my God, she goes on like a broken record saying this to me a couple of times. And I think parents do that. And, I have, as a child, been quite difficult to my parents. And I remember being say the same thing, say the same thing over and over again. And then as you grow into your profession, you realize that sometimes as lawyers, or you kind of have to say to somebody, listen, this is your best opportunity in the courtroom. I just want to recommend you accept this deal. And even if the client keeps saying all kinds of stories, you know from the outcome and your experience, this is what the best deal will be. So you keep saying this to the person, you will not get an opportunity to speak in the courtroom. I recommend you accept this deal. So what happens is you're saying the same thing, and sometimes the people who is angry and agitated keep thinking, oh my God, this person's like a broken record. So one of the things is that when you're repeating a point, remember to use a lower tone, okay, and use a pleasant voice. Because what happens is, if the person, if you're dealing with a person who is very difficult, and we'll talk a little more about it, it's important that you're trying to get this message through to them, because they're not calm and they're not listening to you. So changing your tone into a low level and in a pleasant voice actually brings down, we talked about this last time, about bringing down the anxiety. And when you're bringing down the anxiety, you actually get them to listen. And if they are arguing with you and you try to argue with them and start giving longer and bigger explanations, I've noticed it never gets through. It just never gets through. I mean, this may be a tactic that you use with your children, but it works very well at the workplace or with people who are difficult. That is there. Any comments on that, or your experience about it, where sometimes you have had to say a couple of to your staff the same thing over and over again, but so that they haven't been listening because they've been anxious?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think I'm glad you spoke about it before, especially this slide about changing the tone, because I guess the broken record practice has a place. It's just the way you deliver it is where it decides where it can live. And I think there's a fine line between, using it to agitate someone versus to calm someone down. And I think that, the calmness, or, the low level pleasant voice really bodes well for any conversation like this. I mean, look, with my staff especially, I think especially we're working with events and previously face-to-face interactions, I think it's really important to ingrain certain messages, especially around risk. And so, every meeting I will repeat the same things. What's the risks? What's the risk to GSA? What's the risk to our students? What's the risk to yourselves as staff members? And it does sound like a broken record, but after a while, instead of, at the start, yes, we have addressed that. We're doing exactly. I said, okay, talk me through it. Yeah. And I think for them, they're like, oh, okay, we have to repeat ourselves. But actually, no, these are important tools to ensure the safety and well-being of anyone interacting with GSA. So by now, they almost preempt. So I don't have to ask anymore. It's just, and the risks are, and I think that's a nice way for information to be carried, between us, myself and my staff. But yeah, there is that fine line about, I guess I don't want to use the word, but nag versus, calmly have a conversation about. There is a fine line there, but I'm glad you brought it up there because it is important.
So Tevita, if you could find out if you have any questions from attendees.
Yeah, is anybody on the call would like to ask us any questions thus far on conflict or conflict resolution? It's such a big topic.
We're just covering it from a very conversational perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the topics that we're covering is to sort of support students through a workplace environment, or just in general, even with your schoolmates or colleagues, any conflict that comes up, especially group assignments for those who do them, or this is a good way just to understand some background about conflict.
Yeah, great. I think that leads to, approaches, like when you're dealing with people who are very upset and distressed. I think many of us have done direct service delivery before we've come into management positions. I think that's a really good approach, because you learn to deal with people, and then you take on management positions, actually then talks about how to interact with individuals. But I thought the best way to talk about it is, some common mistakes. Like we use this term, I know how you feel, okay? And really, my question is, do you actually know how another person feels? I think often when people are angry and agitated, and then they're pouring their heart out and getting angry and upset, and they will retaliate. And you've heard this, like, you don't know how I feel, no one knows how I feel, okay? Now, I'm sure sometimes you know what it feels, But I think using, and we will talk a little bit about what can be used, but instead of saying, I know how you feel, yeah, I can truly, like you're the manager and you're making somebody redundant and saying, and the person is very upset and crying and saying, oh, I know exactly how you're feeling. Actually, the reality is you do not know how that person is feeling. Their anxiety, their sadness, their emotion, their family situation, their personal situation is a very personal experience. And using statements like, I know how you feel inappropriately should be avoided. Then, when sometimes people deliver the worst news, and after that saying, oh, no, don't worry, it's not that bad. You're going to be okay. It'll get better. I know the intention is very much there, but I think to explain to somebody and say, you know what, I to say that, oh my God, you don't have to say, I'm so sorry, this is doomsday, this is terrible. I'm not saying that. But I think you just need to be careful that statements like this actually minimize the other person's feelings and makes the person more addressed. And they may feel they really will not understand the empathy that you're trying to show. They'll probably be very angry and upset with you. So I think it's very, very important to understand how to deal with people who are very upset and distressed. And also the common mistakes which I've seen is sometimes people are very angry and upset and they're crying. And I think the most important thing is when people are crying sometimes, trying to ensure that they have a private and quiet space to cry, and also just remaining quiet when they are crying, rather than trying to keep just telling them, don't cry, it's really, crying is not useful, don't cry, is not sometimes very useful. And I think my feeling is, it's important to, these are the three common fields, like, I know exactly how you're feeling, oh, don't worry, nothing's going to be bad, everything, life goes on, one door shuts and the new door opens. These are all these common dialogues and they have all good intentions. But I think we have to just be careful when to say it. That's there. So, and Tevita, some of the comments that I had with dealing with people who are upset and distressed is like saying things like, I'm so sorry to hear about that. And, I'm sorry, like, instead of saying, I understand, say, I'm sorry that you're feeling upset. Okay. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the other, you've just nailed it there, is that one of the common mistakes is trying to insinuate that you understand the emotion of another person in a situation that was potentially caused by your conversation. So I think you've got to basically just step yourself back a bit. Because those types of comments antagonize someone, or it can create further conflict. So these tools are fantastic because you don't want to make a potentially awkward or bad situation worse. And I think I'm just understanding from the point of view of the person is that they might need time. You don't want to deliver bad news and straight away say, I know how you feel. It's awful, but you'll be fine. I mean, that's a kick in the teeth for somebody. It's like, well, hold on, you've just delivered some news that affects me. It's probably best if you just say, look, I'm really sorry about this. I can't imagine how you're doing it. Let's sit down and tell me about how you're feeling through it. Is there any other ways I can support you? So I guess in that manager-employee relationship, it's really important just to make sure that you give them space.
And I found these statements really powerful, something for us to learn. Like, really, as you said, I'm so sorry, that you're feeling like this. I can't imagine what you're going through. And would you like to sit down and tell me how you're feeling if you're comfortable? And sometimes saying, I don't know what to say to you, but I'm happy to listen to you. Okay. And I've thought about it. This is the way I can help you. Rather than saying, don't worry, it's not the end of the world, everything is going to be okay. One door closes, the other door opens. There's a bright job waiting for you. Don't worry, even if you fail, you can utilize your time to pursue your hobbies. I mean, I think these are all ways that you want to make other people happy, but I think there are sometimes ways to understand when people are upset and distressed, how to deal with it. And moving after that, dealing with conflict, I think I wanted to talk to about how to understand when people are actually talking too much and without focus. What can be some of the reasons and how you can help them with that? So I don't know, Tevita, have you gone? I'm sure you have, because we've been at meetings together, and when my mind is so bogged down with so many things that you're saying the same thing in so many sentences in a convoluted manner because your mind is just baffled with all the things that you're dealing with. And so just having those clues to help people understand is, often people talk too long when they're just excited. And in interviews, I've spoken about it last time, listening to the key questions. What do you have to answer about? Even though you're excited to tell them everything, I've got 5 minutes, so I'm just going to I've got to overcome my nervousness and excitement and stick to this matter. And sometimes you understand it very well. It could be a mathematical problem or a concept, and you're just struggling to get the concept, frustrated with the matter because you're not able to make the other person understand. So you keep talking and talking for a long time. Then sometimes you're also like, a bit confused and saying, oh, how much should I tell them? If I give them all the information, will people be upset? I struggle with that sometimes as a CEO. So, we're going through this difficult period through financial stress in an organization, or we have some complaints coming in. How much should I share with my staff? If I give them too much of information, would I be sharing my burden with them and making them more stressed? Or if they don't know, would they hear through Chinese whispers and be upset about it? So it's often difficult. Sometimes just being embarrassed to tell people what you're going through, And so, how are you going? Oh, really well. How are you going, Rachna? Yeah, really good, really good. Everything's positive. And actually, it's not positive, but you're just embarrassed and you're so like, I'm having this difficulty. And sometimes if you're confident to share it with a person who can maintain your confidentiality, that's a great way to get off that burden off your shoulder. That's there. And also being very shallow, like, when you don't understand something, it's better to, I must say, sometimes when people talk about technology and building and, square meters and construction and all that, I can't comment much. And I rather say to my general manager, Tevita or Sajal, hey guys, I don't understand this. I need help, rather than giving a lecture on, what I've learned out of the internet, because that sounds so shallow and people will understand it. Another thing is that you also notice sometimes people are just very lonely and they just want to talk to you because they're so lonely and they found you and they want to keep talking about it. Or some people just want to talk because nobody has given them validated or given them any positive feedback. So they feel that if they talk about it, other people are going to say, it's like seeking validation, seeking appreciation, being acknowledged. And some people just like to think loudly and keep talking about it. So any comments, Tevita, when you read this, like experiences that you feel you've experienced any of these? I mean, I've given you some examples. Like I've experienced all these feelings at different period of time. Like I've gone for a job and felt frustrated. Sometimes I don't know what you're talking about, particularly things like compliance systems where you don't know what that other employer is using. And then you have to say, yeah, I have experience in that. And then you're trying to dig for subject matter. So over to you, Tevita, to make some comments.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this sort of links in with even in interview skills. I think a lot of us have fallen into that trap of just talking for the sake of talking. And I think it's that nervousness, but these slides always link into your internal conflict, because you want to be giving as much information. You want to seem like you know what you're talking about, but in hands you get so nervous, you end up talking about the same thing over and over and over. And I've definitely been in that situation in some interviews. And I think, especially with jobs that you really want and you're interested in, you really want to make a good impression, it sort of backfires slightly if you're not prepared. I think the other point there is not knowing everything. And I think we spoke about it briefly last week about it's okay not to know everything, you know, especially in these meetings, and suddenly the acronyms start flying left, right, and center. And it's okay to ask them, so hold on, can I just ask, what did you mean by that? And I think that's actually a powerful statement. And also it helps with conflict, because if everyone in the room thinks that everyone knows what they're talking about, but actually it's not the case, later on that causes conflict later, because there's going to be questions, there's going to be confusion, and then that leads to conflict. And so even just, pulling us, look, hi, I'm really pretty sorry to interrupt. Can I just ask, what did you mean by that? Because that's not my field. I'm not a surveyor. I'm not into construction or whatever. It's really powerful, and I think it'll help deal with a lot of the symptoms that come out of this. But yeah, absolutely fallen for all these traps myself. Yeah, it's funny seeing them written down.
And I love the way that you led into this. Is some of the ways to say is like, I'm having trouble following the details. Can you summarize your point for me? Like, I know many times I can say, thank you for calling me as the CEO for this meeting, but I may kind of at the outset tell you, I don't understand this concept very well. So that's why I brought my general manager, who will be in a position to answer these questions better to you. That doesn't mean, oh my God, what are you leading an organization without knowing? No, it's okay not to know it. Then, I want to be sure we have time to get to everything. And I'm concerned, when somebody goes on and on and on and on and on talking, instead of saying, okay, now let's move on. I think you say, my God, you seem to have lots of stuff to talk about, and let's not get sidetracked. Let's stick to the point. And I think I have been often in that position when I'm talking to a staff about a particular issue. I remember something else and I jump there. And then I have to say, sorry, I've gone there. I'm coming back to my topic. That's there. Or it's okay to say, Rachna, I think you've called me to talk about this session and we wanted to discuss how we'll deliver it. Can we talk about that a little later? And I think I need more time to understand your concerns. That's not being, you're not at all being rude. You are being quite clear and letting the person know very gently you've sidetracked from that issue. The other one is like a session like this, when I'm talking with Tevita, to be understanding, Tevita, we've just got a few minutes before 11 o'clock and exactly 6 minutes, and we may just discuss some critical points. And that is actually giving a clue to the person and saying, you know what, there's time limitation, you're spending too much of time on something. Then if we had more time, we could talk more about it, but since there's lots to cover, let's stay focused on this. Then we have limited time. What outcomes are you looking for? So people come to me and say, okay, Rachna, at orientation day, we had this amazing photo booth and it costs blah, and students would love to have a photo of their first orientation day. I have it on my fridge. My grandmother has it on her fridge, and goes on and on and on. I sometimes okay, you're asking me for some extra budget. What outcome are you looking for it? So I think these seem to be some really important clues that we can use when we are discussing. And I thought, there may be many others that we can utilize, but being really careful of the situation, how you're trying to deal the conflict or having a conversation is when you choose these kind of statements. If it's a very sensitive staff who's really traumatized, what you don't say, okay, now we have limited time, come to the outcomes. That's not going to work, isn't it, Tevita? What are your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. I think we talked about it last week about being able to read the room or the people that you're with, so that listening, actually listening to the non-verbals is so important when trying to deal with conflict, because a lot of the time conflicts are started up because we're not paying attention. And I think that's the key part here, is if we just take a little time to pay attention, understand the people in the room who's talking, your staff members, your colleagues, that goes a long way to never even getting to that conflict. I mean, conflict's inevitable, it's part of our lives, but I think it depends on severity of the conflict, will depend on how well we can sort of listen and know the people we're with.
Fantastic. Now, I am very conscious that we have kind of come to the, the session where we kind of finished communication, but we will be dealing about managing stress, because we have an exam month coming up, study month. I think some of us, not some of us, but many people will be returning back to their workplace. The conflict of from a home life back into home work life, or sometimes still continuing with home life, will be managing stress. And so, Tevita, I was suggesting that the next session we should spend on talking about stress management, some common simple principles. We're not qualified to kind of give medical advice or psychological advice, but really day-to-day experience on how people can manage stress is what we wanted to talk to you about. So summarizing these sessions, I think, I found that communication is an art of how you actually understand to read other people's mind and understand what other people want to talk to you or want from you, and being able to respond to their ideas and needs, and being able to convey that from or to convey your own needs is very important. And to say things in a positive manner, in a kind manner, which will reduce, emotional stress for other people, or that can give you an early resolution, is the principles that I have kind of gathered through conducting these effective communications. So, Tevita, on that note, I just wanted you to tell us a little bit about what's coming up this week at GSA, the online programs, and if you have any idea about any of the sessions that are coming up next week, or when you will be communicating that. My God, we've kind of come to the end of May, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. So like any other week, we have programmed around 10 to 12 activities or engagements online weekly. And so this has not changed. So Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m., we run our webinars. Yesterday was on governance. Today, obviously, on the part 2 of effective communication. Tomorrow, we've got Erica Freinenberg in to talk to us about setting boundaries and behaviors for our loved ones at home. So particularly focusing on carers or parents, and just setting those boundaries. And the timing is extremely pertinent, just because of the situation we're in. And then Thursday, we have our friends at Academic Skills coming to do a workshop on preparing for exams, writing papers, and essays. So that's going to be happening at 10 a.m. on Thursday with Academic Skills, and that'll be a workshop style. So already we've got a lot of people sign up to that one, because I think it's that time of year where we need to sort of understand how the good practices are of getting this assessment done. So that's on Thursday. And then on Friday, we have our Feel Good Feels on Feel Good Fridays on 3 p.m. on Fridays. And we have a local artist from Melbourne. We'll be jamming away through our Facebook page, and that happens every Friday. And throughout the week, actually today is Tuesday, we have Meditate, our grad group, who are running a mindfulness session today. So please go to our Facebook page and see for registration details, but that's happening later today. So everything you want to get involved with GSA on online webinars and our social connectedness is going through our Facebook page, and it's held up to date. Also, a lot of the ideas and comments and feedback is coming through from a group called Connection in Isolation at GSA, and that's a Facebook group that we manage on that page. And I think we'll go up to the 300 mark in students, and just telling us what they're really interested in, or what things that we can do to help support them. Now, 2 of the things have come back around transition to work and academic excellence. So hence the workshops and the presentations that Rachna and myself are facilitating over the coming weeks. Next week, we also have some special guests from UMSU Legal. They'll be talking to us about some of the services they provide. We will actually have Academic Skills back on board next Thursday. They'll be running a session on preparing for exams and take-home exams and some tips for that. So that's already looking like it's going to be a really popular session to sign up. And we also have some other awesome connectedness sessions happening. So some Netflix watch party we've got, and some there's a drop-in dance session also. So please look at our Facebook page for the details and registrations. But know that every day, at least Monday to Thursday, we are running something at 10 a.m. for webinars, and in the afternoon, generally something to do with social connectedness.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you know, I just a message to the students is that returning to campus is going to take its time, and it's going to, you know, make some of us anxious. So a lot of the June month we're going to spend on seeing how best we can support you during this exam period. So any suggestions that you think would help you, please feel you know, free to give us through the evaluation process. We have a form at the end of each of these sessions that are there on our blog page where these recordings are kept. So if, you know, feedback is just helpful, you know, to help us plan the service delivery or the programs that's there. And one of the most exciting part of it is next week, we also have our annual general meeting. It's a great opportunity for students who are enrolled to come and be a part of an organization in, you know, hearing about what your council members did last term, the term of 2019-20, to meet some of the council members who have been elected, but also be able to be a part of the constitutional reform to assist us in understanding the proposed changes and getting your views if you would like to support it by voting for it or against it. So I think it's all exciting times. So I again want to thank Tevita for joining me in these sessions. And, you know, I appreciate the participants who have joined today. I hope you're going back with some ideas and some context that will help you build your skills or be able to reflect on your positive skills. So thank you once again, and a big thank you to Andrew Lee, Christine, and Lou from the student engagement team, the communication team, and the representation team who all support GSA to put these events together. Thank you, Tevita.
Thank you.